later we'll have some open line time, but I thought you would like to be in on a little bit of a footnote in history, which has the potential to be much bigger than that. As you may have known from last week, I started to do some reporting on a situation down in Houston where they have a Democrat who's I think the mayor down there. And she is an outspoken feminist. More than that, she's an outspoken lesbian. And she decided to push through at the city level in Houston the Equal Rights Ordinance, the ERO for short, that would add sexual orientation and gender identity to the city's non-discrimination provision, including public accommodations like restrooms. Well, the locals down there put up a fuss. They didn't like that, and within just a few hours, they managed to get about 17,000 signatures. In fact, that's what they were supposed to have. But instead, they got like 55,000 signatures to get a special consideration, a reconsideration of that proposed ordinance. And instead, the locals over there found ways to exclude thousands and thousands and thousands of those signatures. Obviously, a totally a bogus enterprise. And unsatisfied with that, the other people in the community said, not so fast. And the local preachers began to mobilize some of the people in their church. Not to be outdone, the mayor and buddies in the gay lobby decided to double down and say, hey, you people are lobbying from the pulpit, and that's illegal. We want to see your sermon outlines. We want to see and approve is the sort of the implicit notion being served up. We want to approve what you guys are saying from the pulpit, and that's when the shinola really hit the fan. Pastor Cary Gordon is from Western Iowa. He's the parson of a church, was it Sioux City? Is it up
That's right.
All right. You have tangled with this kind of political blowback yourself. You've even warned pastors here in Iowa, get it together. This is going to happen to you. Yep. And I guess you're in a position to say, I told you so.
Well, I am. I've been saying this since 2009, and I've been called, all kinds of horrible things. But one of the things I've been called is an exaggerator, and that's just proven to be untrue. This kind of started happening before this when Pastor Scott Lively, who right now is running for the governorship in Massachusetts, actually was sued in the United States federal court because he preached a sermon against homosexuality in the country of Uganda. So, you hear about this stuff happening. Like last week, American evangelist Tony Miano went over to England and was street preaching on the corner, and he preached against homosexuality. And he was arrested by British police, and they charged him with using, this is a quote, using homophobic speech that could cause people anxiety, distress, alarm, or insult. And so when we've pointed at these things happening on foreign soil in Europe and in Canada, we're said, oh, it'll never happen here. That's just there. That's different. That doesn't make any sense. Well, then you have Pastor Scott Lively, who flies to Uganda on a missions trip, preaches against any kind. He wasn't just preaching against homosexuality, by the way. He was preaching against any kind of sin that violates holy matrimony, which is something Christians must teach and has been teaching for thousands of years. He comes back to the United States, and a pro-homosexual agency finds out about what he said in another country and sued him in a federal court in the United States. So all of these things have been unraveling. We've seen this coming. So we really shouldn't be surprised that in Houston right now, you have pastors that are really being abused through the discovery process in a lawsuit. And I would point out that the pastors aren't even technically the plaintiffs. They're not the ones that brought the suit against the mayor of Houston. It was a legal organization that did it, but the pastors are being sort of whipped by the discovery process. It's an abuse of power, and you've really got, fundamentally, it's fascism, because you have a mayor that has violated her sworn oath of office. She refuses to abide the law, which says, like you pointed out, Jan, they only needed about 15,000 to 17,000 signatures. Well, they produced 50,000 signatures saying, we're not going to allow men to come into a woman's restroom. I mean, this is crazy. I'm reading this. My wife, as you know, is about to give birth to my 5th child, and we think it's a girl. I'm going to have 3 girls, 2 boys. And I'm going to say something not only as a pastor, but I'm going to say it as a dad. If I ever saw or knew that my daughters were in a public restroom and some guy walks into the bathroom on purpose, violating their right to go to the bathroom without being harassed in some way, I would deliberately discriminate against him, and if so, if necessary, violently. And that's my duty before God as a dad. You can't even believe the stuff these people are doing. So they've passed this law in Houston that is a violation of common sense and decency. And the people said, this is ridiculous. Throw it out. 50,000 signatures. The mayor took the signatures and threw them in the trash and refused to honor it. So that's fascism. And so all of this other stuff is an outcropping of fascism. And it's homofascism. I think that's a fair term. It's an outrage, and it's coming to a city near you, folks, and you can bury your head in the sand or deal with it.
All right, what's the best way to deal with it?
Well, the best way to deal with it begins in the pulpit. We've got pastors that are absolutely unwilling to stand in their pulpit and confront sin by name. They want to discuss sin in generalities because they're cowardly and they don't want to get fired from their job or harassed by people who are upset and offended. They refuse to address sin in specifics. Like, it's wonderful to talk about sin in generalities and preach against it, and the people say amen. But as soon as you say the sin of drunkenness, well, then everybody in the congregation that has a little problem with drunkenness take personal offense and get mad. Or if you talk about having sex out of wedlock and that it's wrong for girls to get pregnant without a husband, without being married, well, then all the parents of the little girls that have been pregnant out of wedlock say, you're picking on me. So pastors, instead of following Jesus, who dealt with sin directly, confronted things, he was always dealing with it, there's this trend in modern culture in the church for pastors to refuse to address these subjects, and it's a shame upon them. It's a shame upon us all. It's failure to do your job as a clergyman. It begins in the church. The pastors have to preach the truth of the Bible and not allow intimidation of government or anti-First Amendment sodomites or anyone else that desires to destroy the Constitution and take away liberty and freedom in this country to intimidate them and to back them into the corner. We have to preach the truth unwaveringly and stand up for what we believe.
I thought it was interesting when I first saw this story, Pastor Cary Gordon. My mind immediately went back to the 1600s in England when you had King James, in essence, outlawing Bibles. Right. Because he didn't like what some of the sermon notes said about the divine right of kings, and he made it illegal to have one of those old Geneva Bibles. That's why that's why he authorized the King James, and it's interesting because in England then, for a long time before that, the head of the church was also the head of state. Right. So he was the King of England, was also the prelate of the Church of England. So if you disagreed with his theology, that was as much treason as if you disagreed with his politics. And so therefore, if you disagreed with his view, and by the way, James was a flamer himself.
Probably.
No, not probably. His middle name, his nickname was Shamey Jamie.
Okay.
And he says, if Jesus had his John, I have my George.
Oh,
so he was a real adventuresome soul. And
breaking news this morning, Jan. This gay couple are trying now, by force of law in England right now, they're trying to force the Anglican Church to perform a public wedding in one of their cathedrals. So it never ends.
No, it can't. And there's either going to be, they don't want neutrality. They don't want to be left alone. They don't want to be even tolerated. It is their view, or they will destroy you.
That's right.
And you have the case of this pastor down in Houston. If he doesn't comply with some of the subpoenas, faces theoretically, he could go to jail.
Well, that's exactly right. And then we have, I think this happened. It's hard to keep up with all of this. It's happening so fast, but I believe it was Friday night or Friday afternoon that this story began to break. I think Fox Radio picked it up yesterday.
Yes.
That there's a couple of ordained ministers in Idaho, and I can't pronounce the name of the city. It's like a French word or something. But they have been basically threatened that they are going to perform a gay marriage in their wedding chapel or face severe financial penalties and possibly imprisonment. So this is happening in the United States. That's a first. That hasn't happened before. It's one thing in Houston last week to have a discovery process that's being abused, where pastors who aren't even really the direct plaintiffs in a lawsuit are being told, turn over all your sermons and all your private correspondence with your church members. But it's another thing when a city in Idaho tells two people who run a wedding chapel that are ordained ministers of Christian faith who oppose gay marriage on biblical grounds, you will perform a gay wedding. You hurt someone's feelings that came and said that they wanted to get married and they're gay. You will do it, or you're going to be fined $1,000 and go to jail.
Cary Gordon, I need to take a break here. We're running behind. We'll come back in a moment. Pastor Cary Gordon is on our Newsmaker line responding to the gay lobby's assault on Christian liberty. Back in a moment.
Start your day right with breakfast at Palmer's Deli on Ingersoll.
Views expressed are those of hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of News Radio 1040 WHO.
An interesting thing is going on in the culture war. For the last several years, some organizations have been pretty quiet about the relationship they have with some of the issues of the day, some of the hot social issues of the day, because they think, well, as long as Obama is in power, what's the point? As long as fill in the blank is in power, you really can't make changes. And so several of the social issues have sort of been put on the back burner until there is a leadership change. The Pastor Cary Gordon is on our Newsmaker line. I was just going to ask you, some people, I think, this is my opinion anyway, Pastor Gordon, are misplacing or mistaking that short-term, okay, we had to hold our nose until we can do something about it, as tacit approval of things like this mayor down in Houston did to ramrod a bogus sexual orientation and gender identity issue into the non-discrimination provision, and thinking that since everybody said, well, this is just inevitable, this is all going to happen, the courts have decided, it's time to move on, and that one thing got about 20 minutes, got about 50,000 signatures of people rising up down there and saying, no, we're not going to go along with this, which stimulated the response of the mayor and the gay lobby to start tossing out subpoenas demanding sermon content. I don't think this issue is over even in the slightest. There's just no avenue at the moment that's practical to talk about it.
Well, that's exactly right. And then the other issue you have is you have the feckless leadership of the Republican Party, and it begins right here in the state of Iowa, that does not wish to discuss it because they just want to run away, because it's very contentious. If you've been involved at all in defending the First Amendment, you realize very quickly how radical and out of control and hyperbolic and vindictive and hateful and dangerous, frankly, that the left is on these issues. And, most normal human beings don't want to be subjected to that kind of abuse. So our feckless leaders run away from the issue because they don't want to be harassed by media and they don't want to get death threats in private. So Meanwhile, the grassroots doesn't necessarily get represented because we keep putting cowards in office in both parties. And this is another example, and I'm glad you're bringing it up, that the grassroots has very little toleration for abusive, ridiculous laws that violate nature and nature's God, that run crosswise with just common sense and biology, that deny the difference between two sexes, a man and a woman. It just blows your mind to think that a city would be so stupid, if I may use that word. I think it's very appropriate, stupid, to pass a law that lets a man go into a woman's public restroom. No dad in his right mind would stand for that. If a man did it to my girls, I'd probably punch him in the nose and let somebody clean up the mess afterwards, and I wouldn't repent for it because I'd feel like it was what God wanted me to do, to protect my little girls. And so it's just out of control. And I think as soon as the Republican Party, if they ever can, finds their morals again, then the Republican Party will start winning a lot more elections.
Pastor Cary Gordon is on our Newsmaker line. We're talking about an Iowa response to what's going on in Houston, and this has attracted the attention of pastors and members of church members all over the country. I'm thinking that's a positive sign, Pastor Gordon. I think that's a good sign.
It is, because unfortunately, as a father of five, I know that there are times, thankfully they're not often, but there are times when children no longer respond to logic and reason. And the only thing left is to spank their little bottoms so that they feel pain. And that's a part of the sin nature of human beings. And what we're seeing right now is we have, unfortunately, clergymen and preachers around the United States who won't respond to discussion. They will only respond to pain. And so the pain is coming. And the pain is being brought by really fascist people who don't care anything for the Constitution.
Now, in case you're wondering about Pastor Cary Gordon, he's using the word fascist here, and you might be wincing over that. I was observing to him off the air a few moments ago. I've been reading a little bit about the German experiments in history of fascism and with Hitler, and reading some of the language Hitler used in putting down and repressing the Lutherans and Catholics in Germany in that era. The language that Hitler used on Catholics and on Lutherans in Germany pre-war, almost identical down to the last syllable, that is now being used against the church by Obama, by secular media, and by social commentators. It's almost exactly the same language, Pastor Gordon.
It's chilling. It's absolutely chilling, and it's the United States. And we're talking about, King James and King George and all of these guys from way back. What's really happening is we have people that risk their lives to escape tyranny in England in particular. There are many other nations, but England in particular. They risk their lives to get away from that, to come over here and found our beloved nation, the United States of America. And I always think of Paul Revere riding his horse, "The British are coming, the British are coming." And the reality is, folks, we don't need Paul Revere to ride his horse in the night and to warn all of us that the British are coming, because the tyrannical British are not coming to America. America is returning to tyranny itself. We are becoming the very old England that our forefathers risked their lives to escape. It is terrifying. And I said this on Sunday. I want to say this. I have so many friends that are Second Amendment fans. They love their guns and, out of my cold, dead hands, they say. I want to say something to everybody that loves the Second Amendment and never goes to church. You guys are your own worst enemy. If you want to protect the Second Amendment, then you ought to get in front of the issue and start helping the church defend the First Amendment. Because I'm telling you right now, if the church goes down, if the First Amendment goes down, none of you are going to be able to keep your guns. The Second Amendment comes next. So everybody that loves the Second Amendment ought to be finding a Bible-believing church that stands against this kind of tyranny and supporting them financially and by putting their bottoms in a pew and being there on Sunday and learning about the Bible.
It was interesting. I was listening to one of the pastors down there in Houston was being interviewed about this, and he was flat out asked, what if you go to jail over your resistance to comply with this subpoena? What if they send you to jail? And I'm thinking that's the wrong question. In one sense, I understand why they asked it, but why would the members of that church permit their pastor to be arrested?
Absolutely. I'm glad somebody thinks like you. That's the truth. I mean, people ought to be out in the streets, protesting this stuff. Why aren't people more outraged than they are? It's bizarre to me. People don't realize the danger that we're in and what's happening. It's happening right under our noses. And
well, the response ought to be, I agree with your assessment of the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is there so to preserve the rest of our freedoms, for Pete's sake.
Exactly.
And if you have some fascist, sexual fascist, that won't abide rule of law, that is tampered with the process of petitioning, has put their thumb and just because they can, corrupted the checks and balances of the system, and has tried to even subpoena a church to pry loose a public record, like a sermon. Like you can download these things in like 20 seconds.
Right.
And if a thug like that can push on the legal system to get a subpoena served or even a pastor arrested, the people, if they've been instructed properly in the pews, would be in the parking lot with their AR-15s, with their weapons, and said, this law, you are not going to misuse the Constitution this way. You are not going to abuse our pastor this way. You have no legal jurisdiction to do this. Advance at your peril.
Yeah,
and I'm figuring it's time.
I think
so I'm not trying to be provocative here.
No. You're just describing the virtue of the Revolutionary American period. That's what you're describing.
I am on the Newsmaker line with Pastor Cary Gordon, and he's what church is it? Where are you again?
Cornerstone World Outreach in Sioux City, Iowa.
Okay, Cornerstone World Outreach, and he has been an outspoken person here in the state of Iowa, helping other pastors and giving them, I would say, giving them cover in order to do what they are supposed to do. Now you have members of government actually starting this process. This is not a new idea, folks. In 1611, this happened when a corrupt king tried to do this to the members of the clergy who preached against his illegal notion of divine right of kings and wrote that commentary right into the Geneva Bible. His response was to make those Bibles illegal and authorize another version. Nothing changes. This is what tyranny always does. It's what it's always done. It's what it always will do. And whenever we see it, we have to rise up and say, no, you don't. No, you don't. No, you don't. This is our opportunity. This is our challenge in this generation to say, no, you don't. And I am pleased to share the conversation with Pastor Gordon. I have a last time out, and then we'll go to the phone lines here at 284-1040 or 800-469-4295 as Mickelson Morning proceeds. So while his wife is nearly, I don't know if in labor, but nearly in labor, Pastor Cary Gordon is on our Newsmaker line. Now, if your wife bears a child here while you are talking with me, if it's a girl, I think you should name it Jan.
That's not good. Oh, you and I both share the joy of having a name that could be construed as a woman's name.
So yeah.
I think for no other reason, I think you're pretty swell.
Let's talk to some of the listeners. This is Mike. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning, Jan.
Hi.
over the weekend, I had the opportunity to read two stories. I'm a Catholic, and they were Catholic stories. One was about the Pope and bishops that had gathered to adapt gay, lesbian, transgender, and bisexual language,
Right.
and to actually be more acceptant into the church of these types of behaviors.
Yes.
The next article that I read was the Pope has transferred one of the most conservative bishops out of Chicago diocese and transferred him to Malta. And installed a bishop that is much more acceptable to the LGBT lifestyle.
Wow.
And I find that very, very sly hand of the devil.
I think it is a tragedy what's going on in the Catholic Church right now. I was thinking about this over the weekend, and how to talk about this without being offensive to Catholics. And I don't want to offend Catholics, but what is going on with the Catholic Church? I mean, you've Obama-fied the Catholic Church.
Yes.
And the church will survive it. My goodness, you guys are going to have some bumpy rides.
I believe the Pope is pushing for even further acceptance because he didn't get what he wanted. This is going to get even worse for Catholics.
Well, his conference shot him down. I mean, I was kind of surprised in that sense. I think 60% of the people at that conference said no to the Pope, for Pete's sake. That's kind of cheeky. The second thing, though, the Pope kept his agenda active. He says, okay, you shot me down this time, but we're going to keep it on the book so we can discuss it some more. Thank you, Mike. In case you're wondering what we're talking about, Pastor Cary Gordon, if you're not up to speed on this is about 11 seconds from the Pope.
By carefully surveying the signs of the times, we are making every effort to adapt our ways and methods to the growing needs of our time and the changing conditions of society.
That's how he's going to decide this issue.
Yes, and this is exactly the same propensity that the Apostle Paul spoke of in Galatians chapter 1, verse 10. And to be fair, it is not just a Catholic sin.
Yes.
It is a sin of evangelical churches all over the world. And Paul said it this way. I think it's the NIV. He said, obviously, I'm not trying to win the approval of people, but of God. If pleasing people were my goal, I would not be the servant of Christ, end quote. And what you have is the Catholic Church and its leader and evangelical pastors all over the world who are actively seeking the approval of unbelieving heathen and in the process violating the rule of Galatians 1:10. And it's a sad day and it's sinful. And everyone needs to get back to their Bibles and be a little bit more concerned about what God thinks than what people think.
All right, so if they show up at your church and say, we're going to haul your keister off, Pastor Gordon, the people in your church going to rise up and protect you?
I would be really concerned about anybody that tried to do that. I don't know the answer, but I do know that I'm a big advocate of the Second Amendment, and people believe in the Constitution, so I'll just leave it at that. Pastor
Cary Gordon, thank you for your time this morning, and I hope that everything is healthy, and consider that Jan thing, okay?
Okay, see you later.